Hello, this is Sara Doyle, and I'll be working with Cassandra Giglio. Together, we'll be presenting our health promotion teaching project on assessing your cardiovascular risk. Heart disease is the leading cause of death across the United States. Across the board, it affects all races, ethnicities, genders, socioeconomic statuses, and locations across the country and around the world. According to statistics provided by the American Heart Association, roughly every 40 seconds, a U.S. citizen will suffer a myocardial infarction. Several of the Healthy People 2020 objectives regarding health disease aspire to improve cardiovascular health and quality of life through the prevention, detection, and treatment of risk factors for heart attack and stroke. More specifically, they design to educate individuals regarding modifiable risk factors such as high blood pressure, obesity, smoking, and high cholesterol, and encourage those individuals to work with all healthcare providers to lower their risk and subsequently decrease the rate of heart disease. More specifically, the target population for this presentation would include primarily the family nurse practitioner class of 2021 and 2022, the undergraduate SUNY Polytechnic Institute School of Nursing, the students of SUNY Poly, and the population of Utica or Marcy, New York that may attend the expo. This audience was selected as the most likely to attend the expo where this presentation is to be presented. The Utica campus of SUNY Poly resides in Oneida County, where heart disease accounts for approximately 30.8% of all causes of death. Nurses in particular, as well, are prone to cardiovascular disease, especially in respect to their employment conditions, which may cause high levels of stress, burnout, sleep problems, and eating disorders. In one important study, 9 modifiable risk factors have been identified for cardiovascular disease. By controlling these 9 factors, it is estimated that up to 90% of the incidence of myocardial infarction could be prevented. While a lot of nurses are generally healthy, I think a lot of them are sicker than they realize. In one study, they found that over 54% of nurses are obese. 96% of these nurses consider their obesity to be a cause of heart disease. 26% were unaware that they were in fact diabetic, and roughly 90% were unaware that they had high cholesterol. Oneida County residents and nurses alike would both benefit greatly from health teaching regarding modifiable risk factors for cardiovascular disease. As discussed in one of our previous lectures, in addition to the population addressed above, we can conclude that there will be about 47 groups of FNP students working in pairs, so 94 students total based on that math, 28 MVCC students, a select group of SUNY Poly undergraduate students, and approximately 50 to 70 outside vendors from the local area. The expo would also have been open to the public, so those should also be considered as well. The SUNY Poly student body is a primarily white racial profile, and this primarily white ratio appears to be reflected in the nursing classes as well as in the general population of Utica and Oneida County. While SUNY Poly in general has a predominantly male population, it may be anticipated that the attendees of the Health Expo would have been predominantly female, as most will be nurses and 91% of nurses in the U.S. are female. Since most attendees would have been registered nurses or nursing students, we can expect that the education level would have been quite high, while most would have an undergraduate degree or some master's level education. There may also be people coming in with quite a bit of experience from their own personal lives and their jobs, and therefore a significant amount of the learners will have some sort of prior knowledge on the subject. They may know of the risk factors for cardiovascular disease. However, they may not be aware of their own risk or the weight applied to each risk in a cardiovascular risk calculator. While attendance is required at the expo for the FNP program, attendees from the community will be present because they have a desire to learn about the wellness and health promotion, and therefore you might expect that their interest could be quite high. Since the majority of attendees, again, will be nurses or nursing students, it can be anticipated that many will share a belief system that follows the nursing model. This involves a holistic approach to care in which a nursing care plan is developed based on the nursing process, using both nursing theory and best practices derived from nursing research. Therefore, it may be important to incorporate some sort of evidence-based practice findings or nursing theory into our presentation. We would expect most attendees to be adults, generally young to middle-aged, since this age group is most typically seen in educational nursing programs. We would expect the ages to range in general from 18 to 65, with perhaps a few adults over the age of 65 from the community in attendance. This young to middle-aged population is perfect for the presentation since this is the population that would be young enough to make changes that would have lasting impact on the modifiable risk factors for cardiovascular disease. Erickson had identified developmental levels typically seen in these two age groups. The young adults typically, according to Erickson, seek intimacy, love, and affection, while failure to complete this developmental stage would result in isolation and avoidance of the relationships. On the other hand, middle-aged adults seek generativity, productivity, and genuine concern for others, with failure to complete this developmental task resulting in stagnation, self-absorption, and a lack of concern for others. We can expect our attendees, which will be primarily nurses or nursing students, to be generally pretty healthy, as this is demanded by the jobs that they have. However, they may be unaware of their underlying risk, and it's important to address such risk while they're young and able to make changes that could better their chances with cardiovascular disease. One study did a systematic review of the general physical health of nurses, and findings showed that there were high rates of musculoskeletal conditions, likely due to workplace hazards. This musculoskeletal disorder rate may be a barrier to change in this population, as they may find it difficult to perform activities such as exercise that would lower their cardiovascular risk. Other findings show that the prevalence of hypertension was greater in nurses than in the general population, perhaps due to workplace stress, and data was inconclusive regarding other cardiovascular diseases, such as MIs or strokes. Strengths of this population include the higher level of education, eagerness to learn, their youth and therefore their ability to make impactful change, and the homogeneity of the population, making it easier to specifically tailor the learning presentation to the population. On the other hand, weaknesses of this population may again be its youth and therefore difficulty making direct connections to risk factors and then, eventually cardiovascular health outcomes. Their busy schedules and their higher rates of musculoskeletal problems, as discussed previously, which may therefore make lifestyle changes difficult. Barriers to learning may include prior experience and knowledge, which may falsely lead the learners into thinking they already know everything about this subject, thereby making them resistant to education. Facilitators to learning, particularly for this population, may be the importance of learning this information so that it can be disseminated to others, to patients as well as to loved ones. Nurses seem often to concern themselves more with the care of others rather than themselves. So perhaps presenting the information as a way not only to help themselves, but also to work with them to help others may be beneficial.
The purpose of this presentation is to provide a general introduction to the underlying causes, risk factors, and health promotion activities and considerations for prevention and management of cardiovascular disease. What are goals? Goals and objectives together play a key role in providing an underlying foundation for measurement in any given circumstance, particularly in education. A course project goal can ultimately communicate the overall course outcomes of which a student will ultimately be able to perform or understand at the completion of the course. Goals should be produced with the consideration that they should be long-term, realistic, broad, and achievable, but not necessarily measurable. Our goals. Goal 1, introduce learners to the basic concepts of health promotion and disease prevention with emphasis on cardiovascular disease risk, looking specifically at differentiation of modifiable versus non-modifiable risk factors. Goal 2, deepen the learner's understanding of and encourage learners' critical reflection of their own personal cardiovascular disease risk factors and steps, modifications that can be taken to reduce their risk. Goal 3, encourage the development of long-lasting positive health promotion activities and strategies that can be taken to lower personal cardiovascular risk. Encourage learners' involvement and utilization of said resources for educational purposes, including how to utilize the ASCVD risk calculator appropriately and how to educate others on how to use this application as well. What is a behavioral objective? A behavioral objective differs from that of a course project goal, as objectives inversely can and should be measurable. An objective can be considered a specific, measurable, realistic, and time-bound condition that must be attained in order to accomplish a set goal. Behavioral objectives are more specific statements that include both an action verb and a content reference. Our behavioral objectives. Objective 1, at the completion of the presentation, the learner will be able to demonstrate how to use the provided resource ASCVD risk calculator. Objective 2, at the completion of the presentation, the learner will be able to identify at least one modifiable and one non-modifiable risk factor in developing cardiovascular disease. Objective 3, at the completion of the presentation, the learner will be able to identify at least one personal or behavioral change he or she can take in efforts of reducing their own cardiovascular risk.
The actual teaching content will be included in a separate presentation, but we'll include an outline here for discussion. Learners will be introduced to the topic by briefly discussing statistics and general overview information regarding cardiovascular disease, just to raise awareness and draw importance to the topic. Learners will be presented with modifiable and then non-modifiable risk factors, and they'll be educated on what makes a factor modifiable, and will be asked to classify risk factors as either modifiable or non-modifiable. Next, the atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, or ASCVD risk calculator, that would be coming from the American Heart Association, be introduced. We would discuss each risk factor included in the algorithm, as well as the weight applied to each of those risk factors, and learners will be asked to identify the modifiable risk factors in the algorithm. Learners will be asked to demonstrate use of the calculator, either using their own information or they can use a case patient's information if they don't have enough information about themselves. Educators will demonstrate how making a change to just one risk factor can lower overall cardiovascular risk. Together, learners will work with educators to select one change that learners may be able to make to reduce cardiovascular risk, as well as how they can make that change.
Online learning is a form of distance learning or distance education which has long been a part of the American education system, and it has become the largest sector of distance learning in recent years. Many collegiate institutions across the country utilize the convenience and continually evolving opportunities of online learning environments. Both students and professors alike have faced the challenges of learning how to adapt and evolve in order to continue their education, not within the traditional classroom setting, however, within the distance online learning environment. The easy accessibility provided by access to the internet and flexibility allotted by the utilization of online learning has made education platforms an integral and valued component of continued higher education. Furthermore, the reduction in financial expenses and burdens of continued education faced by students has significantly decreased with the addition and use of online learning environments, making a movement towards the use of online learning a preferred method of teaching and learning within the United States. For the purpose of this presentation, the target population of online learners to be considered are predominantly nursing students and furthermore advanced practice family nurse practitioner students. Therefore, teaching must be tailored towards the specific population of individuals. Health professionals, specifically registered nurses, require continued education in order to maintain both their professional qualifications and competencies. In efforts to maintain clinical competency, encourage critical thinking, and enhance clinical skills, nurses require continued education throughout the duration of their careers in order to adapt and evolve to the ever-changing and rapidly evolving demands of their work environments. The decision to utilize distance online learning in order to achieve the necessary competencies required by nurses rather than traditional face-to-face methods has been made for many reasons, including difficulty for nurses to get an in-person classroom setting due to heavy workloads, time and energy constraints, geographic barriers, cost of learning and classroom teaching, and the lack of learning opportunities and support provided by supervisors and clinicians within the work environment. When considering the efficacy of utilizing online or distance learning environments, one must consider both the benefits and barriers of online learning, and furthermore, the characteristics and qualities both professors and learners must possess in order to effectively utilize this platform of higher education. The first consideration is the instructor and their possession of critical core teacher competencies required for effective online instruction. Most important online teacher competencies include communication skills, technological competence, provision of informative feedback, administrative skills, responsiveness, monitoring learning, and providing student support. The second consideration with online teaching is the student or the learner. A number of factors and situations can act as barriers to affect student engagement in online study. Barriers that many students face with utilization of this learning platform include technical difficulties, perceived isolation, challenges balancing study, work and family commitments, confusion with content, poor academic performance, and lack of motivation. Without the ability to troubleshoot technological issues and challenges faced during use of online courses and teaching platforms, instructors risk impacting the student's ability to access and utilize learning materials. Effective instructor-student communication skills within the online learning environment rely greatly on the instructor's ability to provide timely feedback and clear interactions with utilization of multiple formats, including email, live chat forums, group discussions, and assessment and feedback provisions. This line of open communication between student and instructor also correlates with student support. Teacher support online involves the effective monitoring of student progress, anticipation and resolution of key learning queries, and establishment and maintenance of rapport. Collectively, these kinds of competencies shape the effectiveness of online instructors and ensure the student experience. Benefits of online learning. Inversely, with the discussion of barriers faced by online learners and instructors engaging within an online learning environment, one must also consider the benefits of online study. One of the more predominant reasons for the use of online learning environments are the many benefits of online learning. Some of the most important benefits of online learning include effectiveness in educating students, use as professional development and continued education, cost effectiveness and reduction of debt, credit equivalency at the post-secondary level, ability to provide a world-class education to anyone with internet access. It's accommodable and flexible, and it promotes autonomy, self-discipline, and responsibility. In conclusion, there are both many benefits and barriers faced by students and professors alike within the online learning environment. The truth is, online learning is not for everyone. The student must possess a great deal of perseverance, self-discipline, communication skills, and technological competence in order to thrive within an online learning environment. And furthermore, must have the ability to work well with their chosen professor/instructor. There exist multiple modalities of teaching methodology when an instructor or teacher is considering what they will utilize for a given topic of instruction. For the purpose of this presentation, the predominant teaching methodologies to be considered and discussed include the participative interactive learning and teaching method, the demonstration method of teaching, and a learner-centered teaching method. The participative model of field practice proposed here is one in which practice teachers and students co-create a trusting and innovative learning environment and make use of a variety of teaching methods, roles, and relationships based on the needs of the learner and the desired outcomes. Within this style of teaching, the roles and functions of the teachers shift from both supplementary to complementary and directive to participative. Rather than the professor partaking in a role of authoritarian dominance, they navigate into the role of a colleague and practitioner working alongside the students rather than above them. With this method of teaching, the practice teacher can instruct or lead by example for the student. Rather than following linear one-way teaching from teacher to student, teaching becomes reciprocal, with a two-way interactive learning process based on mutual discussion and sharing of values, knowledge, skills, feelings, and behaviors. Essentially, professors must view themselves as equals to their students and learners and work collaboratively alongside the student whilst also evaluating the learner's progression and understanding of material. This methodology works well with the health promotion presentation as it forces the teacher to consider the learning capabilities of the learner and speak to them with equality rather than a lecture-based didactic approach. This fosters rapport and mutual respect between learner and teacher. Demonstration method teaching is a methodology of teaching which utilizes the use of both lecture and visual aids in efforts to reinforce learning of a specific task or skill. A demonstration can provide both a concrete and realistic display of material, fostering a learning experience that solely by its nature commands attention and participation. A demonstration can provide a common basis for later discussion, which in turn can promote and reinforce learning. This methodology of teaching works well with health promotion teaching learning presentations as it engages the learner and forces the learner to interact with the presentation. Demonstrations can be presented at both an individual level and also a group experience. With this presentation, the chosen application is the ASCVD risk calculator. A demonstration method of teaching can be incredibly conducive to learning with this particular risk calculator, as the teacher can both show and educate the learner on how to use the application, how to interpret the results, and furthermore promote discussion of steps that can be taken to improve the learner's overall health and risk of developing cardiovascular disease. The teacher will demonstrate proper use of the ASCVD calculator, and the learner will demonstrate their level of understanding by showing the teacher how to utilize the application appropriately and effectively. Educators have long defaulted to lecturing as a strategy for efficiently presenting course content. However, the teaching to lecture is assigning students to the relatively passive role of listening. It is not surprising that many students are unable to apply information from lecture in a meaningful way. There is a growing body of research highlighting how active learning strategies can promote deeper levels of information processing than those achieved through listening to lectures. In essence, the standardized didactic method of teaching has been altered and evolved into multiple disciplines of other forms of teaching in order to stay current and relevant with learners' preferences and strengths. Active learning can ultimately be defined as those learning activities of which engage students and promote deep, meaningful thought behind what exactly it is that the student is doing and trying to. Active learning involves various methods and strategies for teaching, including case studies, class debates, think, pair, share activities, role-playing, peer teaching, gaming, or questions embedded into a lecture. Students who feel included and capable will often be more motivated and willing to work through course material that may be difficult or trying. Learner-centered teaching represents a paradigm shift from traditional teaching methods by focusing on how students learn instead of how teachers teach. In essence, the subsequent response to the style of teaching is that the teacher becomes a co-learner with the student without a concrete distinction between the two groups. This methodology forces a teacher to truly consider the needs and learning differences among students and join said students on their journey to learning while still providing evaluation of students' performance, necessary feedback, and the ability to grade the student. This methodology works well with a teaching learning presentation of material as it takes into account the learner and pays less attention to the instructor, which is crucial in gauging an individual's retention and understanding of material. Every individual understands things in the light of their past experiences, and this is true of teaching and learning as well. People develop their ideologies of teaching and learning from what they have experienced in their past. Therefore, one of the most significant principles to be applied with any teaching methodology is that not every person will learn the same way, nor will every individual interpret, internalize, and process material and information the same. It is crucial to take into consideration the principle that what a student learner already knows will ultimately affect their future learning. When considering a teaching learning environment, one must also take into consideration the population of individual who's receiving the information and learning, hence assessing your learner. It is safe to make the assumption that the majority of the learners will be healthcare professionals, professors, and nursing students, However, there will be community members who come to hear and watch the presentations who may not have any prior knowledge of medicine, disease process, or healthcare, so this must be taken into consideration when developing a teaching project for the community. In addition, some other principles of teaching learning can be applied to the aforementioned teaching methodologies, including understanding that teaching is an interactive concept, and there are several different platforms for educating and teaching other than just lecturing. These include written, verbal, demonstrative instruction, active, interactive learning, and participatory learning. Learning becomes exponentially more interesting when both the teacher and learner are active participants. Rather than a simple lecture or verbal methodology, a presenter can consider the use of visual aids, pamphlets, interactive games, posters, cell phone applications, etc. to engage their learners. As you can see here, there are some additional listed principles for effective teaching. In conclusion, the predominant principle to be considered when utilizing an interactive participative methodology of teaching is to tailor teaching to the learner, and to understand that every individual learner receiving the presented material will require varying methods of teaching. Any presentation of material should be learner-specific as to ensure that teaching is effective.
After the presentation, learners should be able to demonstrate use of the ASCVD algorithm. This will be noted by the educators through direct assessment and observation of the learner's performance. At the beginning, and then again at the end of the presentation, learners will be asked to complete a brief questionnaire survey with a series of questions asking them to rank their level of comfort using the ASCVD calculator, their ability to identify modifiable risk factors, and their ability to identify one change that can be made to reduce cardiovascular risk using a 5-point Likert scale. This is a copy of the assessment tool that will be used to complete the evaluation of the student learning. The survey before the teaching would gauge prior knowledge of the subject, while the post-teaching survey would be used to evaluate learner understanding of the subject after the teaching. Likert scales are popularly used in medical education. The information gleaned from Likert scales are ordinal in nature, and it's important that we take this into consideration when we are interpreting our results. For example, there can be a danger if you have clusters to the extremes, such as someone saying they strongly disagree or strongly agree, and an average of those two extremes would appear neutral and not reflect the true nature of the data. Experts suggest that to combat this, that the median should be used as the primary measure of central tendency when interpreting your results. However, if they don't fit into a standard parametric test, you can use frequencies or percentages of response in each category, or a Pearson's chi-squared test, which is what we're going to end up using on the next slide. In order to use a chi-squared test, you'd have to have a question first. For example, did our presentation improve learners' confidence in their ability to correctly use the ASCVD calculator? From this question, we would build a hypothesis, such as, results show statistically significant improvement in learners' confidence from the pre-test to the post-test in their ability to correctly use the ASCVD calculator. In general, using a chi-square data, you would have to have a p less than 0.05 as the test for dependence. And in this case, if our p is less than 0.05, then our data would support our hypothesis, and we can conclude that our hypothesis is indeed correct. In order to be able to use it, each entry must have 5 or more responses, so we would at least have to have a great enough n in order to use this test. In order to illustrate using a chi-squared test, we used some imaginary data, which you'll see in the table in Figure 2. In this case, for these test results, our chi-square would be 10.583, degrees of freedom would be 4, and our p would thereby be less than 0.05. And again, we can conclude that our hypothesis originally was correct. We can use similar hypotheses for each one of our learning objectives that we established earlier in this presentation. And just as a note, the smaller the p, the greater the dependence of the test result, and therefore we can conclude the greater the extent of learning that took place for each of those objectives. It's important to perform a self-evaluation as a teacher to ask ourselves not only did we achieve our objectives, but also to perform a thorough self-evaluation and ask ourselves more detailed questions. Researchers have identified 9 dimensions for teacher self-assessment, including questions surrounding organization, preparing students for new learning, positive relationships, deepening learning, presenting new learnings, helping students reflect on and celebrate their learning, building an environment of culture, applying learning, and engagement and employment of students.